We're done RealAg Radio on Rural Radio 147. It's time for the after show. Let's get going. Welcome, everybody, to the RealAg Radio After Show. Hope you're having yourself a great day. We just got off the air on Rural Radio 147, and we quickly switched to our discussion here on YouTube. As always, we didn't really quite leave enough time for the news, but maybe we'll get to some of that here today on this Agronomic Monday. If you have any questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. We are live here on the After Show. The idea here is to continue the conversation from our RealAg Radio show and get your interaction as much as possible. Broadcasting today live from Guelph, Ontario. It's good to be out east. Saw some fields earlier today. It was Pete was giving me a hard time on the air that I admitted I was doing some crop scouting, going 50, 60 miles an hour down the road. I am sorry. I was just trying to get to a meeting on time, Pete. Sorry. But, crops look pretty good. Pete's been describing them very, very well in the past few weeks here on the program, and lots of reasons to be optimistic when it comes to that Ontario corn crop as people try to get some spraying done now as much as possible. We mentioned on the show today that spraying can be, am I in Pete's basement? Ken wants to know if I'm in Pete's basement. I'm not in Pete's basement. Pete was actually giving me a really hard time, Ken. The fact that I wasn't with him. We should have been doing the show together. But hey, Jason says we got no sound. I don't know. It sounds like everybody else is hearing me. Not sure what's going on with you there, Jason. Let me know if it changes or everybody else has a bit of a problem. It would be kind of fun, though, to broadcast from Pete's basement. Let's just be honest about that. That wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing. We could have a lot of fun. Like a pub night, just like that. Yeah, it'd be kind of good. Lee says everything sounds good there. Appreciate it, Lee. Thanks for tuning in, buddy. And Canadian Cowman, hey, how are the conditions out in the Fraser Valley today? Everything's rocking? Let me know how that rain quit, as that's one of the areas that is quite wet as people are trying to get their haying done. What Pete and I were talking about on the show is that spraying is kind of a frustrating time of the growing season, right? And you think about seeding and planting, you kind of have a logistical plan, and you're allowed to implement it based on the conditions that you have, of course. And we've had some frustration like in Manitoba, but you know that today I probably can't go. Maybe in 2 to 3 days when it dries up, we probably can go. Okay? When it comes to spraying, it can be like an hour-to-hour thing. And you have like the best of intentions to be productive when it comes to spraying on that day. And the forecast said that, winds were going to kind of be kind of low. Maybe you got a window in the morning. You got a window later on after supper. And sometimes it's just like today doesn't work at all. And then you just kind of have that ebb and flow where it's like I could go, I might not go. Oh, no, this seems like it's shitty again. But it's kind of really up and down. And it really does present a real kind of frustrating time of year. And you just kind of, you know that you need to take control of those weeds early, right? Because for as long as those weeds are growing, depending on the crop, you're losing yield. And there's really nothing you can do about it. You have to get out there and control those weeds early. But Mother Nature, once again, is not being that motherly, as Pete always likes to put it, and really not helping out. Canadian Cowman, who is in the Fraser Valley, says he's spreading manure right now. Forecast is sunny and hot. Hopefully get some corn planting wrapped up this week. So Fraser Valley, still planting corn. Yeah, it's a Mother Nature. Isn't she great? So lovingly, that woman. One of the things I talked about in the Top Ag News today was the fact that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland had a meeting, did a joint press conference. The media asked some questions. Some of it good questions, I thought, and some of it sort of like, why are we asking this question on this stage? One of them was you have the two financial leaders in the NAFTA region. Obviously, Mexico not a part of today's meeting, and we're asking about gun control. I thought that was just like, there's other questions to ask. I'm not saying it's a bad question, given a different context. I just thought, look, why are we asking this question? Who cares what Chrystia Freeland thinks about gun control? I care what she thinks about inflation, and I don't understand that at all. They did talk about in the question section about. Just gonna go to my notes here really quick because I'm gonna forget it. They talked about the price cap on Russian oil. Not all oil, just Russian oil. We'll see how that goes. They obviously need agreement from the European Union on that because they are way more dependent on Russian oil than countries like Canada and even the U.S. on a percentage basis. Freeland pushed that the sanctions are working and are a great way to assist Ukraine in rebuilding its country from a financial perspective. So for those of you out there that are keeping score and assuming that Canada's going to have a carve-out, an exemption for Russian fertilizer coming into Canada, I don't necessarily think this press conference today was very good for your cause. We heard on RealAg Politics last Friday, Karen Proud from Fertilizer Canada talked about the fact that she brought up a point that I hadn't necessarily been focused on and thinking about. I have been focused on the 22 crop and whether or not there will be some sort of back payment to farmers in Ontario and Quebec and the Maritimes for some of this sanctioned fertilizer that they bought last fall in 21 and still had to pay a tariff on, which seems just utterly ridiculous from numerous angles. Karen brought up the fact that this government needs to make a decision on what happens on fertilizer bought for 23. So if you go out today and we've seen a drop in fertilizer prices, if you go out today and you buy fertilizer that possibly the supplier would be getting from Russia, you would pay a sanction on it on 23 crop. And so this whole situation repeats itself. The government has to be clear about this. And we are the only country in the G7 and beyond that is putting sanctions on fertilizer coming out of Russia and Belarus and not have a carve-out for it, an exemption. And the government has really maintained that you either support Ukraine or you don't. And if you're saying there should be exemptions, you're saying you don't. That's been the message, and it has not changed. Even though there has been some political support for a change, there has been a lot of, obviously farmers saying this and other stakeholders as well, and this hasn't changed. They also talked about gas tax holidays. This is something that is being chatted about a lot. The Canadian government has really not bid on that one at all. And I wish they would have talked about the price on pollution. They did mention climate change, of course. Both of them worked that in. But I think the media should have asked Yellen about whether or not the U.S. would be pursuing and looking at a price on pollution, a carbon tax in the future. Why or why not? I thought that was a good stage to ask her that question, and nobody really did, of course. So other things in the news, there was a discussion. We talked about the CN rail strike. 750 signal and communication employees are on strike as of June 18th. But a bigger fish to fry in this area is the fact that CN has a separate labor deadline looming with the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference that is coming up, and that contract expires on July 22nd. The bigger the Western Canadian crop, the bigger of an issue this is going to be here between now and July 22nd. And with all the rain that has fallen in parts of Western Canada, the heat that is coming, we're working ourselves back to a decent production number on the Western Canadian crop. Just the rain that has fallen in the Palliser Triangle as one example is going to be a big part of that. We're going to need to move some grain, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on CN to make all this happen. It just feels like we just did this. Like just. We've talked lots about this meat labeling issue, how beef, ground meat, pork and beef is being singled out to have like a warning label on it when it comes to saturated fat. And there was a big story in the Globe and Mail about this today, and I found it very fascinating. While Health Canada still really hasn't bucked off this idea, and at least there hasn't been any comments to the otherwise, groups like Diabetes Canada isn't even pushing for it. Okay? So what we heard is Diabetes Canada in this story said, where is it here? The quote, "We encourage the federal government to consider exemptions where the evidence supports them." So that's kind of a one way of saying, like, if you don't have evidence to support, if there was evidence, wouldn't Diabetes Canada come out and say, "Hey, there shouldn't be an exemption for ground meat"? That's not what they did. That's not what they did at all. So we'll see if Health Canada does change their mind. I remember back to the conversation with Dennis Laycraft from CCA. This decision should be made here in the very, very short term. Like, if you guys are watching, what do you think about this? Do you think Health Canada is going to change its mind? Should they change their mind? Who's asking for this? I keep on asking that question. The why on this is just it's lost on everybody. A story that I read in the news that I think is sort of it won't be a surprise to any of you. It has to do the Parkland Institute, which is based at the University of Alberta, has released a 54-page report. I have not gone through the whole report, just the executive summary at this point, but it's entitled "Finance in the Fields: Investors, Lenders, Farmers, and the Future of Farmland in Alberta." The report concludes, and it's written by Catherine Ask. She said in an accompanying press release, the roots of the current shift go back to the 2008 financial collapse, when investors searching for more stable places to store their wealth began buying farmland in droves everywhere, including, as she reports, in Alberta. She infers that farmland investors are the ones increasing land prices, making it difficult for new farmers to enter the industry. This is always kind of a bit of a sticky wicket, as we'll state that, in terms of, on one hand, land investment companies have obviously created demand for farmland, which has pushed prices, which has been good for farmers trying to exit, right? And so when you think about the runway for people to exit their farm and cash in, so to speak, it's been good. And so from that aspect, if you're a farmer that's looking to possibly, you don't have somebody to take over the farm, or you don't have any other sort of succession strategy, you're happy that farm management companies are in the market, whether that's a hedge fund from New York or Bay Street or somewhere abroad. You're okay with it. Provinces like Saskatchewan do have rules in place. I can't recite those to you. I don't know them off the top of my head, but there's limits on foreign ownership of farmland in a province like Saskatchewan. I'm not sure what other provinces have this. Now, as the report indicates, if you are a smaller farmer, a younger farmer, the price of land is so far out of reach, it's really deterrent for people to acquire farmland, which others would say, depending on which end of the pendulum you're on, or where you are in this whole mix, you're saying, this is BS, this is crap. I want to be able to be a farmer, but it's not even, the price is not even attached to the ability to cash flow it, right? So here, let's get some feedback on this. I knew we would get some feedback, because I think this is a topic that's, no matter where you farm, the U.S., Canada, this is something that people are talking about. Canadian Cowman says generational transfer of equity is a major contributor to high land prices here. Kyler says Bonifield Teachers Union are buying up all the land in my area and won't take anything less than 3% return on their highest priced land, starting to push land rents north of $450 per acre. Yeah, so so the same thing is happening in real estate. I was reading a story in the Arizona Republic about the housing market in Phoenix, and it is really, really being driven by hedge funds or a real estate fund looking to acquire swaths of houses to put into the rental market. Of course, Phoenix, and probably this is the same thing in places like Florida, San Diego, where they're destinations for people to go. There's a lot of volume when it comes to things like VRBO. People may not have a house, but they want to go there for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, but they're willing to rent instead of owning. And what it's done is it's really pushed prices higher. It's put the market out of reach for locals. And a lot of concern that the market is super, super inflated. Think about the show Yellowstone, right? That's pretty much the premise of what that show is about. Is funds, investors coming in, buying swaths. In that case, it was swaths of ranch land to convert into subdivisions. In that case, I think they were going to build an airport, all of that kind of stuff. The price of the land goes up so high that if the taxes are attached to the value of the land on some of that farmland, the ranchers can't even afford the taxes, never mind trying to acquire any and compete with some of those big-time investors. So here's the question, though. We know the problem. How do you fix it? Is it to have legislation in place, whether at the state level, the province level, to create qualifications for if you are going to own farmland, what the rules are in terms of residency? Is that the way to go? Should we just stay out of it and it be it's a free market? If people want to buy, if it's an individual person, if it's a company, if it's a foreign ownership, it's a free market. Leave it alone. Let it be. The market will sort itself out. Is that strategic? Is that the way that we should go? I think this is sort of an issue that Canada and other jurisdictions really have to deal with and sort out and figure out. We've seen this where. There was a construction company, the Canadian government wouldn't approve it. It was China was going to buy, their name totally escapes me. And it wasn't in Canada's strategic best interests. Think about acquisition or the attempted acquisition of things like Potash Corp or like a BHP and what that would mean. Should we be, thank you, Kyler. How do you say that? Acon? Right. It was a company from China was trying to buy it, if I remember right, and the Canadian government said, no chancey, not in Canada's best interests. Some are upset about that. It limits, if you're the person selling, you're upset because you want as many buyers as possible, no matter where they come from. But if you are somebody that doesn't have the pockets of, say, the Chinese government, you're sort of like, hey, what is going on here? What are we actually doing over the long term? Canadian Cowman says, it seems like we're almost back to feudal Europe where the rich own the land and the serfs farmed it for them. So this is one of the big discussions. I appreciate you bringing it up. This is one of the things that comes up a lot too when we discuss this issue is, so in order to be a farmer, do you have to own the land? There is a high percentage of farmland in the U.S. that is owned by 80-year-old widows that the land has not moved. I think that you bring up a really good point. There was reasons why people moved away from that system. Farmers, I mean, and is just I just don't know what governments, as an example, as a decision-making stakeholder, what they do here to rectify the situation. Maybe it is just limits. I think there is a pride factor here, and not. And I don't say that from a negative standpoint. That I think they're having the ability for up and coming farmers, young farmers, or people mid-career that want to be. It's not just young people. There's people mid-career that would like to get into farming. The intensity of the capital required to do so. Never mind the land. How about the equipment? It's a really, really big reach. Kyler says everyone likes a free market or government intervention until either side doesn't yield the silver bullet solution. It's very fair. And what you want, similar to the situation with slaughter capacity is a good example. Similar to the situation in the discussion of capping gas prices as an example. Intervention comes with unintended consequences. And I know that sounds like sort of a reason not to do anything, but that's one of the challenges the government is trying to see, okay, if we do this, what are some of the ways that this could go that maybe we're not seeing at first glance? Okay? So we're trying to solve a problem, but in our effort to solve that problem, do we create another problem that is actually bigger than the first one we were trying to tackle? And I don't know what that would be in this case. Some may say, well, if you limit who can buy farmland, then are you creating is Canada a place to do business? Will people look at Canada as a place where you just can't? It's just not a place that regulations allow for people to want to invest. There's domestic investment, and then of course there's investment coming from afar as well. Canada has been somewhat criticized in some sectors for not being a place to invest. The oil and gas sector is an example of that. That's for a whole nother reason in the go forward. But I think the unintended consequences are here are one of the ones where it becomes basically paralysis in terms of what governments feel they should do. I would suggest this, and I say this in sort of passing, is if you could tie rules on who should own farmland to climate change, you would get action from the current federal government, because that's one of the things that makes them kind of pitter-patter, get at her, and make a decision. Interesting discussion there. Totally not intended in terms of who should own farmland. I know that for a lot of upstart farmers, young farmers, people really looking to, want a career, owning farmland has become, it's always been a barrier, but it has become something of great significance that I'm not sure anybody really knows how to fully fix. Now, speaking of all this, is what's on the horizon. We saw the U.S. CME Purdue Sentiment Index for last month. It moved to a rating of 99, I believe it was, on future sentiment. Farmers not feeling very good about the future. A story I didn't get to in the news today, asking the question, is trouble brewing for the U.S. farm economy? And all of this at a time where prices very, very strong. Of course, there's concerns about rising input costs, concerns about inflation. With inflation comes increased interest rates, which comes, the carrying costs of the farm debt become more and more challenging. So the story says, for the first time since September 2020, the U.S. rural economy is showing signs of weakness. That's according to a March Rural Main Street Index from Creighton University. For June 2022, the RMI sits at 49.8. That is down from May at 57.7. The index ranges between 0 and 100, with a reading of 50 representing growth neutral, and is generated by a monthly survey of bank CEOs in rural areas of a 10-state region dependent on agriculture and or energy. So a 50 represents growth neutral, and we're at 49.8. So similar to that Purdue CME Sentiment Index, things are, and that's farmers. This is bank CEOs that are lending money to farmers. So they're seeing a lot of different income statements. They're seeing a lot of different balance sheets. They're seeing the interest and the direction that those interest rates are going, and people's ability to service some of that debt. That it's, a lot of times we talk about the struggles of the farm economy when it comes to low prices. Here we've got high prices and sort of similar kind of challenges. So I'd be interested to see where those kind of this kind of index and others, where they go and the go forward here for the rest of the year. Kyler says, I already see people getting worried about the forecasted 0.75 increase on Prime on July 13th. Absolutely, man. I quoted it last week. Manulife says 1 in 4 Canadians cannot afford their mortgage if interest rates go higher. They are going higher. The fact the U.S. went up by 75 basis points last week is a green light. It allows Europe, Australia, Japan, Canada to move forward with the Federal Reserve. So they are going higher. We don't know where the top is of this, but they are going higher. And as I've maintained, I don't really think that a lot of people have their head wrapped around what all of this means for the economy, and also what it means for your business. I think it is lost on people about what some of the impacts are here. And I agree, Kyler, farmers are worried about interest rate hikes and inflation. We saw it in our RealAg Studies inflation survey going back a couple months ago before the last 50 basis point increase. Farmers are worried about inflation. Some of that is political. There is no doubt. They're looking at it through a political lens. Most farmers are not voting Liberal in Canada. There's no secret to that. And so they're concerned because the current government has to wear that and has to come out with a strategy to combat it. But farmers are also the ones that have to pay the higher debt service levels because of the rising interest rates. So I agree. Farmers tend to be a little bit fiscally conservative when it comes to fiscal policy. The amount of money that went out during the pandemic would be something that really concerns a lot of people in agriculture. And so I am not surprised that you anecdotally you're sharing with us, Kyler, that a lot of people are concerned about it. And the thing is, it is not stopping there. There's more to come when it comes to interest rate hikes. Whew. Okay, I always promise we're going to stick to a half hour. We are almost out of time. I want to thank everybody for hopping on the after show. Really do appreciate it. Okay, one more comment from Kyler. Thought I read somewhere that every 25 basis point increase is $160 per $100 borrowed per month. It's like on a mortgage level, it's like, some people's mortgages are already $200, $300, $400 higher after some of these increases. When you pencil out that house record, with how cheap, basically free money previously, and now you look at where rates are and where they're going, there's no more free money. The ride is over. Want to thank everybody for joining us here for the after show. These are so much fun. I always enjoy them. Great participation today. Really do appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. I love the fact we can continue the conversation. We can dive into some of the issues we chatted about on the radio show and continue with you here on YouTube and Twitter. And if you missed RealAg Radio today, you can catch the replay tomorrow, 7 a.m. Eastern Time on Rural Radio 147, or just download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, wherever. It doesn't matter. Just listen. Grab it. Listen to it. Always appreciate everybody tuning in and providing their feedback. Everybody have yourselves a great night.